We've got Jacquie Franciulli here, covers Virginia for Wahoo's 24/7. We've done this a few times, Jacquie. I always enjoy talking to you. A big game here for both teams, but they're back on track. They get a win in the AC, but Miami's heavy favorites in this one. Just simply put, we'll get into it with all the details of how Virginia's playing and Miami, but should the Canes be on upset alert in this one with Virginia coming off that big win against North Carolina?
I think so, in a way where I don't think it's going to be as big of a loss, or I don't think the score line is going to be as big between the two teams, just because when you look at Virginia, especially the first half of the season, they played better than what their records show. One thing that we talked in one of our podcasts on the Virginia side was that Virginia has had a lot of games that they've had a lot of self-inflicted wounds. I mean, against JMU, it was after the weather delay, after an emotional game, because that was a game that they were playing tribute to the three fallen Virginia players. You know, they had the adrenaline, and then weather delay came in and things just spiraled out of control in the fourth quarter. Against NC State, it was them, they lost the game. I mean, there was ill-timed penalties. Against Boston College, there was like 11 penalties for over 100 yards. So a lot of these games in the first half of the season, you can argue that Virginia was sometimes the better team. And you saw what Virginia was capable of doing against North Carolina. I think when every little thing is in its right position, and when everything clicks, you can have that type of performance by UVA, especially when you see what they are able to do when the O-line is clicking. The first couple of games, I mean, they had a complete overhaul in the Virginia offensive line this year. So by game 3, they adjusted who was center. Brian Stevens moved from right guard to center. And then they had Mikhail Bole, Noah Josie on the left side, but Jimmy Christ was hurt up until the 4th-5th game of the season, and he usually plays at right tackle. And then they kept moving guys around. Ugana Nana, who was guard, moved out to tackle. Ty Furnish, who was center, moved out to right tackle, and then right guard. And I feel like because of that moving kind of the musical chairs on the O-line, it was hard to get that chemistry going. And then they found the right lineup against North Carolina, and they had their best rushing performance in 2 years in an ACC game. So I think Virginia is going to keep it closer than what the spread is. I don't know if I'll go as far as saying that I would pick Virginia to win, but I've also covered both teams, and I've seen Virginia and Miami, and some of those games you just don't understand what's going on no matter what you see on paper. Virginia and Miami have some interesting games. I mean, we all remember last year in Charlottesville. So I'm not quick to say that this will be an easy win or a upset alert for Miami.
Yeah, you touched on last year, the 4 overtime 14-12 game. The year before, that was when Virginia came down to Miami last time they were here, and Virginia won that one. I think, to answer the question, I do think Miami has to be on alert. Now, they've got the better team. It's based on what we've seen from both teams throughout the year, I don't think we'd argue that, but Miami did not play well against Georgia Tech. And, I thought it was good, Colby Young, just hearing players have a good perspective on this. And the question was asked to him about, Virginia, are you guys paying more attention to them because of what they did against North Carolina? And look, what we kind of know what the response would be. Oh, we always pay attention to, but he did say, he's like, look, we lost to Georgia Tech. And so we know that we always have to, come to the game, essentially kind of paraphrasing, but they feel like they're going to be ready because of that. And I do understand that, because they've been through it. This isn't a situation like going into Georgia Tech when everything was rolling for Miami at that point. And Miami just doesn't have a lot of room to spare, certainly with ACC standings. Both these teams are 1 and 2 right now, tied for 9th. So they'd like to move up in the standings with the win. So I think Miami is always going to be on alert. I think anything can happen with how they've been playing. But again, if they handle their business, if they play the way that they should be fine. With Virginia, though, Jacquie, and Miami had just lost to North Carolina, so we certainly were very aware of what was going on there. What stood out to you? Because 31-27, this wasn't a thing where, Virginia didn't need very many points. They put up 31 there on the road. What stood out to you about, what they were able to do in that win?
Well, first, Virginia always has a small margin of error. but they diminished those self-inflicted wounds. I mean, there was a couple of times where you saw, okay, this penalty was costing them this. I mean, they had 2 turnovers. I mean, they lost the turnover battle against North Carolina. They had an interception in the end zone after a holding penalty called back them from 1st and goal to make it 1st and 13, then Muskett threw an interception. And Mike Hollins had a fumble in the end zones, 2 end zone turnovers, and they still won. So when you ever see this upset, I mean, you could think that they lost the turnover, they won the turnover battle, but they didn't. The reason why they were able to win this game is they won the battle of the trenches, not only on the O-line that we touched on a little bit, but they also on the defensive side. Drake May was being pressured for the entire game. He never felt comfortable. And if you watch that game, you watch that final drive for that Virginia defense, Drake May was throwing a ball under pressure with Paul Akiri coming from the side and getting him and pressuring him. And then he threw that ill-advised pass right through James Jackson. So, and that's how they sealed the win. So when you look at that Virginia game against UNC, you saw a couple of things that were slowly piecing together. Because if you watch closely, every single game and every single loss this season, they got better in one area. They just couldn't put it all together. And it seemed like everything came together after that bye week. It was like everything they worked on in the bye week, it came together in that game against UNC. The O-line played well. They were balanced. They had 228 yards on the ground, 4.2 yards per carry. They had 208 yards in the air. Malik Washington had another incredible 100-yard receiving yard game. They're also 8 for 18 on 3rd down, which was the second best this year. They had 6 red zone trips for 4 touchdowns. Everything that wasn't working with them the first half of the season was just clicking. Also on defense, guys were just making plays and key stops. I mean, they made North Carolina, who is one of the best 3rd down teams. They were 4 of 13 on 3rd down and were 0 of 2 for 4th down. I mean, there was one questionable decision by Mac Brown who decided to go on 4th and 6 at midfield, but Virginia made the key stop of Cohen King doing a pass breakup. And that was the difference too. I think Tony Elliott summed it up best in his post-game presser. In the first half of the season, and maybe even a little bit last year, Virginia players were looking to other players to make those plays. But against North Carolina, they were just stepping up and making those plays. Tavon Kyle, Cohen King, Malcolm Green, several DBs did great in coverage, Sam Westfall, and they made it really hard for them to have any success in the air. And the linebacker core that includes a 4-star freshman, Cam Robinson, did a good job of stuffing the run game for North Carolina. And all these things clicked. The other part was they were healthier. I mean, if I go through the injury list for this Virginia defense, it's quite incredible. It'll probably be a shorter list of the starters that were playing for Virginia because they have 2 starting defensive linemen out for the season, Sue Agunloye and Cam Butler. Chico Bennett missed a couple of games. Then you have Paul Akiri, who just came back against North Carolina. You have Ben Smiley that missed a couple of games. In the secondary, you have Florida native Antonio Clary, who has not yet played in this game. They're playing true freshman at DB. And then their corner true freshman played for 2 games, had his first career interception, and then got hurt in the celebration. I mean, that's how many injuries they had on the defensive side of the ball. So it's hard for me to judge that first half of the season, knowing how many injuries Virginia had in the starting lineup. And a lot of those guys are coming back. You know, they have running back Xavier Brown. He's coming back on the offensive side, although granted their running back room is pretty packed right now with Paris Jones, Mike Collins, and Kobe Pace. But this is what we're seeing is these guys are getting back to fitness. Jimmy Christ on the offensive line, those defenders, and that's helping them too, because at the end of the day, you want depth in that defensive front. You want guys to rotate, and you don't want to rely on true freshmen. You don't want true freshmen to be in your 2 deep, especially on the DL. So that's what's changed and what we saw against UNC as well.
Jacquie, you touched on something earlier about the physicality, Virginia's trying to play with, wants to play with. We hear that a lot with Miami on both sides of the ball. We've been hearing that ever since Cristobal took over, but that's something Miami really prides itself on. It's why they think they got the win against Clemson. They felt strong up front on both sides of the ball. And I want to touch on that about Virginia, because the numbers were impressive either way. With the run, we saw, up front, up close with North Carolina being able to run the ball against Miami. but they didn't have those numbers against Virginia. And then conversely, as you mentioned, they were able to run the ball well against North Carolina. So what are you seeing up front, and essentially how important you think this is going to be for that, for Virginia in this one? And because I know from a Miami standpoint, they certainly they want to continue to stay strong up front, regardless of who's kind of in and out of the lineup, particularly on the defensive line for Miami, as Kelly's been ruled out for the year, or probably out, likely out was kind of the wording. And then, still kind of waiting for Akeem Mesidor, which I don't expect him to play this week, but they've got other guys, but I know Miami still wants to be physical there.
I mean, it's crucial for Virginia. I mean, the whole question this whole season is how far this team can go with this offensive line. Because again, this offensive line is completely different from last year. They brought in Brian Stevens, who started off at right guard, then moved to center. Ty Furnish moved to right guard from center. And then they played with Ugonna Nana, who came in as a guard, went to tackle, and then they moved Jimmy Chris to tackle, Ugonna Nana inside. I mean, there was a lot of changes. So when they came to the game against North Carolina, they actually got St. Thomas Aquinas standout Blake Steen was playing a little bit more of right tackle. So we got to see him and Ty Furnish at right guard. So that lineup seems to be something that they settled in a little bit. And what we saw is they clicked a little more. And I mean, it's just repetition at this point. They're playing together. I mean, even during fall camp, Brian Stevens only came in the summer. He was one of the spring transfers. Jimmy Chris was hurt. Mikhail Boley was hurt for a couple of the practices. Noah Josie. I mean, they didn't even have the starting five playing together at fall camp. Their first game together was against Tennessee. I mean, welcome to college football. Some of these guys coming from Brian Stevens from FCS to FBS. So for me, I kind of see this progression. So it's going to be very important for them to play with that physicality again that they saw against UNC for them to win. The good news for Virginia is that they're seeing this gradual improvement, and they can see what all their hard work is paying off. I think Tony Elliott said it best. The game against UNC is a confirmation that they're on the right track and evidence that things are clicking for them. I think the only question for me is, against William Mary and against UNC, the two wins for Virginia, there's still a couple of things that you can say that if things went a different way, or if that one pass breakup didn't happen, that one key player didn't make that big play to stop UNC or stop William Mary, things could be different. I mean, that's college football. But for me, those pre-snap penalties can't happen, which they've had a few of those on the O-line. They can't have a holding penalty, which is against a lineman that ultimately ended up with Tony Muskett being intercepted. So the O-line is still not perfect. I mean, the O-line is still at one of those things where their margin of error is small. So for me, that is the big battle for them. I think Virginia has shown a lot of progress. I mean, I've heard so many people and people who are not connected to the Virginia program asking about Terry Heffernan's group. I think even Josh Pate at Late Kick talked about Virginia's offensive line's improvement. So that is the big thing for Virginia. And I think you've seen improvement. Now, for me, it's, can they keep it up one more week? I mean, they've been battle tested. They faced Tennessee's defensive line. They faced, I know it's William Mary, but they have two really quality edge rushers that honestly, I would imagine if they hit the transfer portal, they would be in an ACC team right now. They faced Maryland that has a pretty good physical defensive front, Big Ten defensive front. And they faced UNC. So it's not like they weren't battle tested. I mean, if you're an O-line, you're learning against some of the best D-lines in their conference and also in the SEC. So they've been battle tested and they're learning. So it's just keeping the margin of error small and not making sure you don't have self-inflicted wounds.
Earlier in the week, offensive coordinator for Miami, Shannon Dawson, spoke about Virginia's defense and what he sees with it. And really, he says Virginia's doing a good job of keeping things in front of them. And when I heard that, in terms of his perspective, I'm immediately alerted because we've heard this about some other teams earlier this season when they faced Miami. And Miami's kind of struggled a little bit in terms of when teams really try to keep things in front of them. It makes, everything a little bit tighter. So I think it's just going to be an interesting challenge. Another thing too, Virginia, I just kind of was looking at the stats there. Virginia's fourth in pass efficiency defense in the conference in conference games. So, not allowing a lot. I know Drake's numbers got up there as passing yardage totals, but again, his rating wasn't real high. And obviously the pick there. So I think that's just going to be an interesting thing from a Miami standpoint with a quarterback situation when Miami has the ball. But with Tony Muskett at Virginia, The rushing totals obviously stood out against North Carolina, but passing, he's once he's gotten in there, he seems to kind of turn the corner, help him lead this team. What have you seen with Tony and kind of how he's kind of emerged, or how his season has gone? Because certainly when we saw this against Tar Heels, to win a game like that, you've got to have good quarterback play. So what are you seeing with Tony and kind of the keys for him in this one?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Tony got hurt in that season opener against Tennessee, and they had to go to a true freshman, Anthony Calandria from the Tampa area. So he only came back against Boston College in that road game, and they had that really good first half, and then that second half, Virginia kind of fell off the rails. It was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde of Virginia. Then William Mary kind of pulled back, and then you saw what he was able to do at UNC. When I kind of compare with Muskett as more of like a game manager type of quarterback. He's still learning and still trying to get with the pace of the game. He's coming from Monmouth, so he said he's learning about big boy football. But I think what you've seen is him getting a little bit more confidence. I mean, he's playing through pain. His shoulder, not his throwing shoulder, he's paying through pain from then. Tony Elliott said that he needs surgery. He decided to not have surgery during the season so he can continue playing. So Tony Muskett has gained respect of the locker room. And I think that's also a big key because he's got the backing of that locker room. So there's no quarterback battle, because whenever you have a backup quarterback who played for 4 games and he did okay, you might have that divided locker room. That's not the case at Virginia. Everyone's supporting Tony Muskett, which was a key win for Tony Elliott and Muskett to have that backing of the locker room. What you saw against North Carolina was he made some really good decisions. Obviously, he would like to take that interception back. It looked like, Malachi Fields is a very physical and very tall wide receiver, and he threw that ball a little behind and a little low. I mean, if you're going after Malachi Fields, who's a mismatch nightmare, you throw the ball high and let him go over the DBs. That wasn't the case in that interception. But he's been able to really work the play action. He's been able to work the option by choosing the times where he's going to run the ball, which is what we saw against UNC. We saw him use his legs a little bit more for the first time. He also has gotten 2 quality receivers. I mean, Malik Washington has been lighting up the stats for Virginia. I mean, he's breaking records at UVA. He's transferred in for Northwestern. He has 1 year of eligibility, and he's increasing his stock for the NFL quite drastically this year. And they have a really good chemistry. And what Virginia has done is they obviously have Malik Washington in the slot, but then they utilized the running backs and also the passing game, Paris Jones, Mike Collins, Kobe Pace, because you have to key on Malik Washington. I mean, Malik Washington has sure hands and will catch anything with them, and he can get those yards after catches. I mean, I think he went through 4 or 5 UNC defenders in order to get that touchdown, to get the lead against North Carolina. And that's what Tony Muskett has. When you have playmakers that will make plays for you, you can play freer. You can launch some balls because you know that Malik Washington will grab it. Paris Jones will grab it. Mike Collins will grab it. Malachi Fields will grab it. So that is the key for Virginia and why Muskett has been getting more comfortable with that injury, coming back, and also just the offense. I mean, when you have more time to throw, I think against Tennessee, I would do 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then 3 Tennessee defenders were around Tony Muskett. Now he has time to throw. So that has also been a big reason why you've seen those improvements for Virginia.
Yeah, no doubt Malik's going to be an interesting player for Miami to kind of go up against and see it. Leads the ACC in receiving yards and receptions, 5th in the country in receiving yards, also 2nd in the ACC with touchdowns. So he's certainly an impressive player. It's been interesting. He's averaging over 100 yards a game. So, Jacquie, great stuff. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks for having me.